Welcome into On Texas Football. Time for a daily update. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by CJ Vogel. Jeff Howe has the week off, resting and relaxing for the July 4th week. Hey, CJ, today I thought we would talk a little Longhorn football and a little Longhorn recruiting, kind of combine both into one update. This episode brought to you by our friends over at Flat Creek Estates Winery. We'll talk a little bit more about Neil and Sean and those guys a little bit later today. Look, CJ, got to ask you, as we look at last week's recruiting fallout, for lack of a better term, Texas grabs two players, Cozy Akpala and John Turntine. Now, I want to ask you about where you think they're going to go and what's left on the board. Jerry and I were talking this morning a little bit, and there really seems to be fewer players left on the board right now than in previous years because so many people have moved up their commitment date. My first question out of the gate is, let's just go position by position and talk about what's really left. I mean, we can bypass quarterback. Let's just go straight because Diabell's already in the boat. Texas is not going after another one. Running back, it seems like Texas is down to two, but they could find another one they like this fall.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting where they go at running back. You know, Xavier Crowell feels like it might be too tough of a pull to flip out of Alabama, given, you know, some of the comments from mom saying wants to stay in the state. We know that's a tough pull for kids from Alabama to decommit and flip away from the Crimson Tide. But you got to start looking in-state, right? And I think the big one for me is, does KJ Edwards ever make it to campus for his official visit with the Longhorns? Of course, that was one that up until his decision to commit to Texas A&M, Texas felt like they were in a really good spot for KJ Edwards, and he did not take that official visit. And that's going to be one thing as the season continues, who starts to appear for weekends to take those officials. If I'm Texas, I'm looking at KJ Edwards saying, hey, just come check it out. And if that's the case, maybe you start moving the needle that way. But I know folks have thrown out Amari Latimer, who committed to Wisconsin. I don't think that is a pairing down the road. Of course, he didn't make an official during the summer, and one wasn't ever scheduled as well. But, of course, Derek Cooper is then the big one. Does he pop up on campus this fall? Of course, delayed his commitment. If he does make it to campus, all bets are on. Until then, well, it's kind of a wait and see and kind of a long shot in my eyes.
So, Cooper, keep tabs on Crowell, maybe see what happens with KJ Edwards long term. That sound reasonable to you?
Yeah, I like that. That sounds my course of action.
Yeah, Texas already has 3 wide receiver commitments, or at least 2, Cohen Brown and Chris Stewart. You can count Jermaine Bishop perhaps as one. He could also be considered a defensive back they've got. And then you have Jalen Lott, of course, who makes his decision tomorrow. And it looks like that's going to be Oregon, at least at this point in time. Well, what do you make that Texas is going to do? Are they going to circle back with Tristan Keys or Jabari Mack? Are they going to see if Caden Finley sticks with Notre Dame? What do you see Texas doing right now from a wide receiver perspective, if anything?
Yeah, look, I think they need to go out after one more, and that even is dependent upon, you know, what Jermaine Bishop plays. I think you need to add one regardless. And I say that it might be a little challenging because Texas just added 4 really talented young wide receivers, 5 if you include Emmett Mosley, who's got 2 years of eligibility before he can move on to the NFL draft. So you're going to have a bit more of a logjam from this past crop of guys that were added to the roster, yet still you can't be in a position where wide receiver takes a dip talent-wise or from a depth perspective. You know, that was something that I thought coming into last year, Texas might have been a little thin. That circle of trust, obviously we talk about it, still thin, but there's always going to be a team elsewhere that doesn't have the season that they have. Is it LSU this year? This is kind of a make it or break it for Brian Kelly in my eyes. Do wide receivers see another year of Colin Klein's offense and say, that's where I want to end up? We'll see. Of course, NIL is going to be a factor all in all, but the production and development, that's something that we know very clearly is something that favors the Longhorns at the wide receiver spot. I bet they circle around for Jabari Mack, Tristan Keys. We'll see there, but Jabari Mack feels like one that they'll certainly keep tabs on.
That's the young man out of Destrehan that's committed to LSU. You mentioned about that. I think that the key here is they're probably going to see if anybody pops up, but those top-rated guys they may circle back on. Tight end is really simple. I'm going to go over those two right now. Hezzy Kent and Caden Prothro both announced on the 12th of this month. Prothro leaning towards Georgia, although Alabama is giving chase as well. Hezzy Kent's Florida, Georgia, as well as Texas. Then there's Kiwi Brown, a young man out of Corona Centennial that does not have an official commitment date at this point that Texas brought in for an official visit a couple of weeks ago. I look at this right now, and tight end is pretty simple. Longhorns would like to have one. They want to get a starting level guy, but if they don't, they really like the fact that they brought in both Nick Townsend and Emery Winston last year. Both guys have looked really well. On the offensive line, it's a little bit different, CJ. I think that the offensive line right now, with the three commitments, Nick Robertson, Max Wright, and then John Turntine, who committed on Friday, they are going to go back and circle back with guys and keep tabs on guys like Malachi Lee out of Hawaii. We talked about him. Sam Roseborough may be a possibility. Other guys in the hopper potentially as well. But look, they've got a lot to work on as it relates to what's left in the hopper on offensive line. New guys could come up. Be interesting to see where Texas turns.
Yeah, about a month ago, we were kind of debating whether or not they would take 5. If the right 5 said they wanted in, do you take up to 5 after a pretty strong class a year ago? Well, you're sitting at 3, and you just saw 3 other guys that you were heavily in on commit elsewhere, and really 4 when you include Ojo, who's obviously at Tech. So, it's going to be interesting because you need at least 4 in my eyes. Keep that room stocked, keep it loaded with talent. Texas, obviously, landing John Turntine's a massive get. Let's not downplay that. But you got to have one more in my eyes for this cycle. They're going to have to find a flip somewhere in my eyes, Bobby. Yeah,
they're going to have to. They definitely are, or find somebody they really like late in the game. Defensive line, it's a 3-man class right now on the interior. Vodney Cleveland, Dylan Berryman, and Corey Wells out of Mississippi. Cleveland out of Alabama, Berryman out of Louisiana. They still are trying to recruit others, but a lot of the top prospects for them committed elsewhere, including Kendall Gerville and James Johnson. They're going to stay on those guys this fall. Edge is a little bit different. Right now, they have 1 commitment in Richard Wesley. Not sure they're going to get to 2 at this point, unless somebody else falls through the cracks. At linebacker, there's a lot of folks available, CJ. After Cozy Akpala, I say a lot. There's 2 in particular. After Cozy Akpala's decision to commit to Texas, that's a linebacker out of Mady Creek last week. Really good football player. Texas still after 2 others, both from the state of Georgia. Braden Rouse out of Marietta Kell, and Tyler Atkinson out of Georgia as well. Those 2 nationally rated recruits. What's the latest on those? And how many does Texas really need to sign?
Yeah, two at least is that number for me. And look, Rouse, things are pretty interesting there because Tennessee had been the long foreseen favorite in that one. He's been to Tennessee the most. That's been the stat that's recruited him the heaviest. He has pretty long-lasting relationships with that staff, yet Texas starting to make some noise in that one. Not saying yet Texas is ready to overtake as the clear leader, but it's significantly closer, Bobby, than I think it was prior to his official visit June 6th earlier last month. And then Tyler Atkinson. I know that there's the ties to Derek Johnson training in the city of Austin over the last month of June as well. If Texas is able to land one of the 2, then you got a pretty solid tandem. If you're able to land both, well, now you're looking at the linebacking position as a true strength of the class. Tyler Atkinson, I think, is one that is a little closer nationally across the board. I think Texas is right there in the hunt based off of what I heard over the weekend. So we'll keep close tabs on that one, but I think Texas is very much in the mix for both of those guys from Georgia.
In the secondary, really, there's one big name left that is set to make a decision this week. That'll be this coming Friday. Smoke Matthews, defensive back out of Charlotte, North Carolina area, down to Texas and South Carolina. Miami thought to be a little bit in there, but he, as well as Devon Benjamin, a safety out of California, Texas a finalist there, along with Michigan and Oregon. CJ, it looks like it could be a 4 or 5 person class or 3, because right now they have Hayward Howard out of New Orleans, as well as Yaheem Riley out of Austin. They need to get at least one more here. The hope is that Smoke Matthews is that guy, but it could be a situation where Texas, like other positions, has to circle back on other guys later in the year. The number of guys that have committed, and I should mention Jermaine Bishop could be in that category as well at DB. The number of guys that have committed shrinks the talent pool that you can pick from right now. I think that's what we're seeing. So even though Texas is at 17 verbal commitments, they got to get to 19, we think, by beginning of football, so that they can probably get to 25 to 27 by the end of the year if they can keep this momentum up. Because I think the problem that we're seeing is NIL is evening the playing field at some level. Texas can't get them all. That's part of the process.
Yeah, it certainly is. And what's going to be interesting to me is how do the flips this cycle go about? Will it just be a straightforward flip as we've seen in years past? Will there be some stipulations and strings that schools will have to maneuver with because of what is expected to be the revenue sharing, right? So I think that might add a little bit of uncertainty for now in terms of what that ultimately will play into in the season. But you can expect Flipmas to continue to deliver presence once again this year for Steve Sarkisian and his staff. That's been a big focal point of recruiting since he's arrived, and I don't anticipate it completely disappearing, Bobby. But plenty of positions, plenty of work to be done, because you mentioned wanting to get up to about 19 commits before the season. Well, 3 of those guys are still specialists, so you still got to look at that number without the specialists in my eyes. And look, albeit important, 16 is really where you want to be from a positional standpoint so you can get up to that number and really fill out that board.
All right. Before we go into the team news and notes that CJ and I have kind of collected over the weekend, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, the Flat Creek Estate Winery. The folks out there, Eddie, Neil, Eva, as well as Sean, all doing great work. The Super Texan recently just won an award out in San Francisco for the best red blend, not just in the state of Texas, but nationally. They received a score of 98 out of 100. It is the closest winery, by the way, to downtown Austin, and it is absolutely a gorgeous venue. If you want to go out there, have a wine tasting, hang out with those folks, it is absolutely gorgeous. Now is the time to do that. Just a tremendous overall venue. And again, you can get the Super Texan or other Flat Creek Estate wines at your local Specs or HEB throughout the state of Texas. Again, that's Flat Creek Estate Winery. Thank you for your sponsorship. All right, CJ, let's keep going here, talking about what we need to talk about as it relates to the team. I posted some news and notes from what I had heard over the weekend about how some young freshmen and maybe some sophomores and juniors are taking to the field for the Longhorns this summer. Where do you want to start with that? I mean, because you collected some notes as well. Let's just talk a little bit about it. Maybe go position by position. Anywhere you want to start?
Yeah, let's start on the defense, Bobby.
Okay.
I like the defense. I like starting up front with the big boys too, because look, I think that there's a lot of excitement with the new additions. One name I've heard continues to impress is Cole Brevard. I know he and Alex January have kind of been the two leading the room. Obviously, Brevard, one of the older guys in that unit, and then Alex January from a leadership perspective, coming back from his freshman campaign last year. There's a lot of pride in the sense that, hey, this is my room for Alex January. But for all of these guys, they've had just as many offseason workouts as a unit as you would expect the quarterbacks and wide receivers, which I am very much a fan of. And right now, one of the young guys standing out to me has been Josiah Sharma that I've heard behind the scenes.
Oh, interesting. I had not heard that about Sharma. Look, we'll see how it all plans out. You mentioned Alex January. I think Cole Brevard is definitely a front runner. Murad Watson expected to play a lot as well. What about the edge? Because I tell you what, I've heard really positive things on 2 guys, and both young guys, Lance Jackson and Justice Terry. Lance Jackson was probably ahead of Justice Terry coming out of the spring. Lance Jackson's continued to ascend, but I've heard Justice Terry has had a tremendous summer. And just the raw material there is very good to work on for the Texas coaching staff, apparently.
Yeah, for both of them. I think it's really exciting because, again, you're looking at two guys right around 265 to 275, maybe upwards of 280 for Justice Terry, but it's some big bodies that move very well, Bobby. Lance Jackson, going back to your point, I don't know if we've yet to tier or really rank the overall ceilings of a lot of these freshmen, but I would be shocked if Lance Jackson wasn't in that top 2, top 3 conversation. Again, just more praise coming out of this weekend for him. And I think the future is very bright there. And that's even not even mentioning Justice Terry, who I think we're all excited about.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how productive they can be this young. I think it's not how talented they are. Really, when you put them on the field, how productive can they be? And that's going to be, that'll tell the tale how much they play as true freshmen. Let's talk a little bit about running back. You and I both heard very similar things on Christian Clark. And I mentioned that in this morning's article. Give folks the real detail of what you've heard about Christian Clark in the last couple of months here, because it seems like it's building up and has been building up from this spring when he kind of played more than we thought he would in the spring after ripping his ACL or his Achilles.
Yeah, coming back in the spring was huge, and seeing how quickly he was able to start cutting, start running full speed, start participating in live situations, I was kind of over the moon. I thought that was very quick. But to his credit, he's been healthy, right? And he's been ready to rock and roll on the field, and that's certainly a positive as this room looks to, I don't want to say take a step forward from a year ago, but I think there needs to be perhaps more consistency. Ball control needs to be a point of emphasis as well. Who can be those guys? Will it be CJ Baxter? Will it be Christian Clark? Well, we've heard Christian Clark's had quite the spring, and he's parlayed that into a heck of a start to the summer conditioning as well. Right now, he's a guy that I've heard has taken a lot of those RB2 reps, and I think that versatility in the pass and the run game is a big key. Of course, you watch his high school tape, you go back to the hands that he showcased. That was a big strength of his, right? There's an easy comparison with Bijan Robinson because of his running ability, but his hands and what he was able to do in the passing game is where he was expected to make a lot of difference early on. Is that the year we see him on the field? It would be huge for Texas to have Christian Clark out in the passing game this fall.
Two names to keep tabs on at wide receiver, and you mentioned him earlier. Emmett Mosley is one, and then also Dalen McCutcheon. Arch Manning really got into a groove with Dalen McCutcheon at times this spring, in part because McCutcheon had to play so much this spring with DeAndre Moore sidelined with the toe injury. Those two guys, those two newcomers, along with Ryan Wingo, Parker Livingstone, and DeAndre Moore, seem to be the guys out front right now in that group, although we've heard Khalik Lockett's name a little bit more of late as well.
Yeah, and going back to Dalen, look, to get on the same page with your quarterback running with the first team as an early enrollee freshman, that's not easy in a Sarkisian offense where the vernacular, the terminology, everything, the splits, your assignments, we've seen wide receivers take multiple years to get fully up to speed. He did that, to an extent pretty well in the first 3 or 4 months. So credit to Dalen. That's what helps get you on the field. And of course, just as a DeAndre Moore followed the footsteps of Jordan Whittington, I've heard Dalen McCutcheon's been tied to the hip of a DeAndre Moore early on in his career. That's very much a positive. And then Emmett Mosley, I think folks are pretty excited for what he can do. Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore, they're going to be those guys that coming into the year you expect. Mosley, a bit of an unknown. Didn't see him in the spring, but you have the tape from Stanford. You have his production at Stanford that you can really start to point back on and see, the vertical passing attack, he's going to be a threat with what Arch Manning likes to do. And so far, there's been a little bit of talk of springiness, Bobby, in his legs, that athleticism starting to stand out.
Yeah, that's one of the things I heard too, was his athleticism was better than expected because you thought he was a possession receiver, and he may still be. But the athleticism there, Rod had, I think, a great point about how well he ranked by Pro Football Focus with competitive catches as a true freshman last year. I thought that was one for Emmett Mosley to just kind of put under your hat. Last, I want to talk about defensive backfield. Some news and notes that I received. 2 freshmen just have a lot of talent, at least 2. Because I haven't heard enough about Jonah Williams yet. We think the athleticism there is off the charts, but haven't heard really enough yet. in the 7-on-7 and other workouts that they're doing. But I continue to hear true freshman Cade Phillips and Grayson Littleton's name over and over and over again. It's possible Cade Phillips may be as talented as anybody in the secondary, is what I'm hearing. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to start at all. He's got to prove it. But the possibilities are there for all these kids. What have you heard in the secondary that whether it's Jelani McDonald or any of the older guys as well?
Yeah, I'll actually start with Jalen Gilbo, because over the weekend I heard that he was a name that they're expecting to be the guy to start the year at that cornerback 2 spot, opposite of Manny Muhammad.
So you think they're going to go with him rather than Warren Roberson or Kobe Black?
To begin the season against Ohio State, I think you're going to rock with the guy who's been around for 4 years. And look, for Gilbo, will that mean he stays there the entire year? We'll have to wait and see. As you mentioned, they're getting pushed from all sorts of angles. And it's not just the freshman, it's Warren Roberson, who had a great spring. It's a Santana Wilson, who I think gets lost by the wayside a little bit because of how deep the cornerback, or how many names are in that cornerback room standing out right now. So to me, how does that cornerback room fill out from weeks 2 to 4 to 5 going into Florida and Oklahoma? That's going to be really interesting, because as we saw against Michigan a year ago, Texas relied a lot upon its veteran guys, and they really condensed that rotation into about just 20 guys per side of the ball. If that's the case, I wonder, do you see a Cade Phillips in his first career start or appearance? Do you see a Warren Roberson, who you've kind of scarcely seen throughout the past few years? I think they're going to rely very heavily on experience and guys who have been around for multiple years.
I will say this. I think, and I wrote this morning, I think there's been a little bit of a breakthrough with Kobe Black. I think it started in the spring, and from what I'm being told, his body has just continued to be reshaped through the summer. And so let's watch for him a little bit too at that defense, particularly at corner. All right, CJ, that's going to do it. We'll have Rod, you, and Coach Shipley on a little bit later. We also have the Talking Ball tonight, where we'll be taking your questions on recruiting and other aspects. But for now, thanks again to our sponsor, Flat Creek Estate Winery. If you're in the Austin area and want to go out and hang out, have a little wine, enjoy your time out there, it's Flat Creek Estate Winery. Make sure you check out the Super Texan, which just scored a 98 out of 100 at the San Francisco Wine Festival. They continue to rack up award after award. It's how Austin does wine. All right, for CJ Vogel, I'm Bobby Burton. This has been On Texas Football. Hook 'em.